welcome to the next project. This is episode 10 of the Harley Benton SC Guitar Kit Modification Project series. In this episode, I will be adding a 3-ply binding to the headstock to match the body, also poking holes in the headstock to accept new tuners. And I just happen to be using hip shot open back locking tuners for this project. I think they call it a tulip button shape. Not sure. Pretty sure. Might. Anyway, let's start the next project. I'm reusing my original headstock template shape to help me build a new routing template to cut the binding channel in the headstock. So it's good to always keep your old templates on hand. I'm going to use the original 1/4-inch MDF headstock template as a spacer to offset this routing template from the actual headstock. And I will use a piece of the 3-ply binding as a gauge when I attach it to the headstock for routing. That way I can ensure I have, pretty close to the depth of cut that I'm going to want. Figuring out a way to mount things and hold things so you can work on them always seems to be a challenge, and occasionally I spend more time thinking about it than the work actually takes. And again, I'm relying on this makeshift disposable router table that I have, and it worked out great. I was able to thread the guitar neck through the hole and use a giant rubber band to hold everything in place while I do my routing. As I'm doing the passes with the router, I'm continually checking it with a piece of the 3-ply binding to make sure I have the width and the depth of the cut right. And overall, it went very well. I did cut down the side, the thin part of the headstock, a little bit deeper than I originally planned, but it turned out very well. And, lesson learned. Maybe I'll do it a little different next time. Before I could add the new binding to the headstock itself, I needed to address the fact where the transition is of the headstock to the fingerboard. And I have actually gone in and cut that little triangular shaped wedge by hand before, where the headstock binding ties into the fingerboard binding. That's not a fun project. So in this case, I decided to remove the fingerboard binding, which also required me to remove the frets. Again, there's the problem of how do you mount or hold the neck while you work on things like the headstock, putting binding on it. And I use that 2x4 rib that I typically clamp to my bench. I just clamp it in the vise now, and everything is held very sturdy. Nothing moves. It gives me a chance to really work and focus just on doing the binding. had pre-laminated all of the binding for the headstock in the same fashion that I did for the body. And this made it really easy to do all these little bits and pieces of binding work for the headstock. And I'm using some pretty simple tools, a single edge razor blade and a really sharp chisel to kind of do my miter cuts. I also use a heat gun, which you could probably use like some boiling water or a really good quality hairdryer to warm the binding to get it to move where you want to. And super glue is my friend. It makes this process go pretty fast, whereas acetone or the plastic cement takes quite a while to dry. I've been using super glue to put binding on, and I've never had a problem with the binding falling off. I'm sure you could, heat it up and peel it off, and you'd probably pull wood off with the binding, but I've never had a problem where the binding just failed and fell off. But, your mileage may vary. If you do happen to use super glue to apply binding, be warned that if you're gluing against raw wood, like a top or something, and you spill super glue on it, that top is pretty much done. It'll probably darken the wood slightly and also make the wood so it will not take a stain. So that's another reason that I pre-sealed this wood with that automotive clear coat. The super glue will get on it and stick to it, but I can scrape it right off as I'm doing here. Any little bit of residue super glue that's on the surface comes right off. And this will get sanded and then clear coated in the end anyway, so it'll all blend in nicely. But if I would have spilled CA directly on the veneer, it would have made a dark spot on the veneer. So that's another reason to have this clear coat in place. I'd like to say that technology failed me, but actually I failed technology. The bit of footage I had for applying the neck binding or the fingerboard binding slipped through my hands. Going back to my original headstock template and using it as a guide for placing the tuner holes. I started with a small pilot hole followed by a 3/8 inch brad point bit, which was just a little small for the tuners, so I had to open up that hole with a regular spiral bit, being very careful not to tear the veneer or the headstock wood. And now I'm getting my initial layout of where the tuners are going to go in, and also mark for the mounting screw hole. And one tip, if you do install these locking style tuners, when you go to put the mounting screw in, the locking button, the little knob on the back, if it's screwed all the way into the lock position, it makes it really difficult to get your screwdriver into that little bitty screw. So you spin that locking knob out as far as you can to make it loose, and then you'll have a little more room to get your screwdriver to the little screw. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment, ring the bell, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care.